All right, this is Julian Klein here with Dr. Ed Ayers. I'm not great at titles, but phenomenal. You're a celebrity in my mind.
There we go.
There you go.
That's all we have time for today.
Yes. And this is the first episode of the Destinations and Conversations interdisciplinary podcast at the U of R. That if it really becomes successful, it means that other people will do it and not me. Because that is other people you could interview someone and put it up there. You know what I mean? Just FYI. Yeah. That's how it's supposed to work.
Okay.
Even though I'm managing it right now.
Well, you thought it up.
I did think it up. I did think it up too. It's all very bizarre. I know it. Good morning, and it's been a long week. It's only Wednesday.
Yeah, it has been.
It has been.
Looks like is everything back up?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right.
Weinstein Hall is the only place.
So
that's
what actually happened?
A snake crossed in the hen. They call it the hen house over at the spillway.
Yeah.
This is good. Now snake over at it's off the spillway. It's where the major power distribution is, right there on the other side of the steam plant.
Yeah.
They call it the hen house. Anyway, it's getting rebuilt. Anyway, a snake crossed phases inside of there, like you would stick a fork in a electric socket. But it's not an electric socket. It's a giant transformer power distributor. The snake obviously is dead, but it looks really good for what it happened. Because I didn't think, if people are going and looking at the snake and Mark Beatty, there you go, Mark Beatty, in the back of his cart. He has it still. Because I thought it's like 35,000 volts. Wow. Kilovolt or whatever. It's a lot of power. and
Well, I never saw an explanation for what happened.
Well, it did. I can speak of this freely because Channel 6 somehow got the scoop 2 days ago.
That's it.
I don't know who told them, but it was a snake that did it.
At least it wasn't a spider.
I have a spider bite right now, and I was like, man, they're terrible. But not that spider bite. Okay. Good morning. We've been talking about the thing about this right now. Destinations and Conversations is, through the lens of people's current disciplines, speaking about current events, i.e., Mr. Professor Zilkin, who I'd like to talk to again and get him to sign. We talked about tariffs and what's in his expertise, not that it changed my mind per se, but the people that watched it were like, wow, I learned something. And that's kind of part of what I want, as opposed to, as well as just getting conversation out there. Okay. And we were talking about, you and I were corresponding about, I start with, I say, university neutrality, and I'm not talking, and to just preface, when I say university, I'm not talking about, because it can get, there's public and there's private, and there's many different aspects to university, and I am just talking right now for the University of Richmond people, but I'm talking about the university system.
Right.
I'm talking from Johns Hopkins to Antioch to the University of Oklahoma, back around, and I know it's not that simple.
Yeah, I know there's over 4,000 different institutions in the country, and they do go all the way from community colleges up to whatever you see as the pinnacle of it all. And they don't really have much in common, except that, what I used to say when I was talking about the University of Richmond a lot, they all claim to do one thing, which is to teach undergraduate students. Right. And my claim always was that we do it as well as anybody. Right. So that places that have a big research focus, you have lots of graduate students and postdocs and all that. The undergraduate focus is not really what they care about the most. And so if you think about if you draw a Venn diagram, what's the point of intersection? It's teaching undergraduate students. Right. And so that's where it all comes from. But the centrifugal forces are great,
Yes.
And so it's, as you think about higher education, trying to find whatever the line that goes through it all is hard. So I'm with you that it's a diverse ecosystem to talk about.
Agreed, and that's fine. I agreed. I was trying to also preface that in my mind, the university system means about educating people.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Higher education just across the board.
Yeah.
Specialized or whatever, just education and educating people. Hopefully and bettering people and empowering people, whatever. Civilizing people, who knows? And so I get back to, in these times where we're a little, unprecedented to say the least. How do we navigate, university neutrality? And I don't know. Maybe I've been thinking this morning, lunch counter diplomacy. You know what I mean? Like, how do we? And I know there's a lot of different terms to lunch counter diplomacy as well. So I apologize, but I was more, where old civil rights guys would use it just about to meeting people where they're at.
Yeah, right.
So I'm using it in that regard. How do we navigate university neutrality, but yet.
Yeah, there's a fundamental tension there because, everybody knows the phrase ivory tower, right? And so, in some ways, we're invented to be set apart. The whole idea is that there's a place that is supposedly immune from the immediate pressures of the market, where you can follow truth wherever it leads, and you can study things that don't have an immediate value, right? So I'm a historian, and so studying dead people for a living is not obviously important to a lot of people. And you have to kind of explain why it matters that we know where we came from and so forth. So and of course the origins of all this lie in the church. The whole idea of monasteries and learned people setting themselves apart. So the trick is, how do you set yourselves apart enough to be able to follow truth wherever it leads, at the same time be of value to where you live? Right. And so I think in many ways the current controversies that we're having with the conflict between the Trump administration and Harvard are just the sort of an age-old controversy turned up to 11, as they say in Spinal Tap. That it's okay, you think you're going to do all this scientific research and so forth, but it's funded by the federal government. We'll just turn that federal payment off, even though what you claim is that what you were doing is curing diseases, inventing the science of the future is for the public good. We believe that it's political in some way. So I think that this is never going to be solved. It's just going to be a constant tension that we're going to have to navigate basically every year as things come up again. So I think one way to gain perspective, and it's one thing historians always do, is that people always think this is the worst time it's ever been. It never is. But people also think that this is the end time. That things are built into this moment. It never is. We're just floating along on the river of time like everybody else. So I think, it's very interesting to see how all the different kinds of rhetoric that are always floating around now suddenly come to the surface in this moment of crisis, right? So you find, so I co-signed a letter from former presidents pointing out that, and this is astonishing to me, that higher education is worth more than all the soybean and corn exports of the United States. That we're the most valuable export that the United States possesses. And that just means, if you think of all the people who are coming here to get educated, and we know you are famous for attracting young people from around the world to come here.
True.
And not to mention the multiplier effect for the economy. So to go back to the paradox, you have a place that's set apart from the rest of the society that ends up generating most of the technical advances of the place. So, the internet is a product of universities. Right. So all the things that we're talking about today of social media and so forth are actually a byproduct of an alliance between the federal government paying universities to help come up with a system that if we were attacked by nuclear weapons from Russia, that would still be extant. That's where the internet comes from. Just like the interstate highway system, right. Is that you make a network that has no one node, right? Mm-hmm. And so the system, not like a spider web, right? Is that if one part of it breaks, it heals right back up into the other.
You have other routes.
Exactly. So, but people have no memory of this. And what they like to do is to talk about higher education as a place apart rather than a place in the middle.
Right. And that's funny, and that's another, thank you, because that's why I really wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
Not just to generate hype for this endeavor, which I do think is worthy, but because that you're a historian, and I figured you could, help me. I'm not a doom and gloom necessary guy. I survived 1989, and I'm happy about that. You can tell me and other people things about the time, and even related to things, and that's a calming effect that I do think we need. Honestly.
Well, I describe myself as a cheerful guy who gets up every day and thinks about the worst things in American history for a living. Because a lot of my books are about slavery and war and segregation and disfranchisement and lynching, and which I was writing about back in my 20s, my dissertation. And why would a guy who's basically optimistic like myself do that? It's because if we don't face that stuff head on, it's just going to come back and constantly torment us, right? And so it's when I was president, it was time during the anniversary of the Civil War and Emancipation, and go out and I would talk to civic groups and business groups and religious groups and try to tell people why it was important that we actually think about the Civil War in a different way. That wasn't just the blue team and the red team, and but that basically the fate of 4 million enslaved people, the largest system of slavery in the modern world, was at stake, and all of world history pivoted around the battles that happened all around us. And I found, some cool people thought, Dr. Ayers, let's just leave this past behind. We got great breweries and restaurants here. And cool.
We had the fan.
Yeah, exactly. Let's forget about that. And business guys, well, do we really want to be looking back? I said, look, the New York Times is going to come and write about what the former capital of the Confederacy, one long word as it's always used in Richmond, is doing about this. And we can either acknowledge it and our central role in it, or we can ignore it and be criticized for ignoring it. So everybody says, all right. So Dominion and other big companies actually contributed so that we could commemorate that. So, this is your point about what does a historian do? It's a strange job of remembering for a living, right? And why remember is that living in the past. We think about all the cliches that we have about that, right?
You're not supposed to do that, right?
Yeah, right. Let it go, move on. We run this great program out of UR called Bunk, which is basically gathers what's happening every day in the news. And it's named after the Henry Ford quote that history is more or less bunk. The only history that matters, he says, the history we make today, which is a very American sort of thing.
Sure.
Where we're obsessed with the past and we love patriotism and all this, but we're also with a
little splash of Immanuel Kant.
Yeah, that's right. And let's move on. So I think that it's funny that most of the museums in the United States are history museums. There's over 40,000 history museums. So Americans apparently love it. At the same time, we don't really think it's important. We really think that people need to study STEM or whatever.
Right.
And I get all that.
Or only one history is important sometimes as well. I don't know which that one is per se, but there's the one history is important, and the rest are. And I say the rest. I'm not even speaking for myself. By the way.
I know what you mean.
But the one history is important, and the rest are kind of. I don't know, reinventions or revisionism and things of that nature. And sometimes when you really dig into it, you go, oh, it's not though. Yeah. It's really not. Yeah. It's funny you brought up something, and this is not going to be very popular in a statement if any of my blue collar brethren watch this. But I will say, I grew up with the monuments because I'm from the city of Richmond. I went to Open High, and I'm from the city of Richmond. Back when poor people could afford to live on Floyd Avenue and such, even though it was an apartment, it wasn't a whole house. They turned it back into
which block?
It was right there, a block up from Benford. They don't call it Benford anymore. I apologize to all you good people at Benford Middle. It was just a block up. They put it back. It was a 2-floor apartment upstairs, apartment down, but now it's back to one house.
Yeah.
House was like $28,000 in 1983, and now it's like, I don't know, before COVID. This is also funny. 331,000.
Oh, yeah.
And that was before COVID.
Yeah,
so now
we bought a little house on Floyd when I finished the presidency. My wife wanted to know why we couldn't keep a 9,000 square foot house on River Road with 3.5 acres and somebody taking care of it. And I said, well, no, we'll need to find our own place.
I love Floyd Avenue. It's not the same, but it's still quaint.
Oh, it's fun.
Anyway,
it's interesting to watch. Anyway,
yes.
you're saying you grew up there.
I grew up with the monuments, and I felt that it's fine that they got rid of them, I guess. But what was really more powerful to me was leaving them up defaced.
Yeah,
that really was a lot more powerful. It may not be a popular statement on either side. I don't know.
Yeah, but nobody knows what to think exactly.
Right, but leave it. But and obviously they're gone. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, but if they were to have left them up but defaced, I mean that speaks volumes. And because I don't know. It's a bigger.
I was on the Monument Avenue Commission, and
obviously they would not have that.
Well, partly, it was all the expletives on it and stuff. People don't want their kids reading that.
Yes.
And so there was that. And it's also just, in the way that, in some ways, we've been owned by being former capital of the Confederacy, people don't want to advertise we were also the site where this all kind of came to a head, right? And so we want to remember what we want to remember and forget what we want to forget.
Right.
And but when I was on the Monument Avenue Commission, it's very instructive because we would have these public hearings all over the city, and the public library and the faith communities and all these. And I found that people would line up to speak, and I couldn't tell from their race, their gender, their age what they were going to say, and which was encouraging in a way, and some people would say, and it didn't map onto politics in an obvious way. Some people would say, let's leave them up to faced, and could be a conservative statement or it could be a liberal statement, right?
Yeah.
Other people will say we need to leave them up here as a reminder of our implication in history. Other people say we need to get them down so we can move on. So generally I found that people were a lot more sophisticated and open-minded than the stereotypes of them would have. People who defended them had reasons, but people who thought they needed to come down had good reasons. So, I don't know what would have happened if we would not had Black Lives Matter. I don't know, because the commission had said that the Jefferson Davis Monument should come down because it was such an egregious evasion of the centrality of slavery and the cause of the war. But then, the mayor had not done anything about that. Would anything have happened?
Right.
And so we'll see. I think Richmond is better positioned to understand all the complexities of history than almost any place in the United States. You can see all the different layers. Yeah. Even on Floyd Avenue, you can see all the, as you're saying. We also have a daughter and son-in-law who live on Church Hill, and going to visit there and just sort of seeing how rapidly things are changing.
When I was a kid, you didn't necessarily go past. It goes Broad. What is it? Marshall and Lee.
Yeah.
You didn't really go past Lee unless you knew somebody.
Yeah.
But now it's changed. Obviously, it's amazing because
and it's progress and it's
progress and it's problematic. That's a whole. I haven't started to tackle the gentrification thing yet.
So I don't want to either. So what we're talking about is what's the position of higher ed in all this, right?
Yes.
So the point being, in some ways, higher ed should be the safe, and just another paradox.
Right.
We should be a safe place where you can talk about anything, but our whole job is to bring dangerous stuff in to talk about, right? And that's the whole attack on diversity and equity and inclusion, which is amazing to me. Those words have been turned into something bad. But the why is that the case? Well, it's because universities are kind of the canaries in the coal mine. We feel things because of all these young people and before other places do. And so people who want to attack us for being centers of indoctrination don't acknowledge that in fact what we are is sort of the interface, of the past and the future. And so, it's pretty clear why universities are attacked, that they are, seen as bastions of liberalism, even though I'm not sure if you actually go.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not really.
It's not really the case. No.
But it's convenient to attack us. So, I guess what I'm saying is that from the very beginning of colleges and universities in America, we've had this challenge, and at sometimes, so during the Cold War, great universities can help us invent the internet and better bombs and things. But now in peace, in some ways, we turn it upon ourselves and see the universities as kind of sowing discord. And which you could also argue is also our job.
Well, critical thinking and independent thought is dangerous at times, especially when they want you to say join a side. And I do pride myself, not on many things, but I pride myself that I have been an independent since 1992, and I'm really happy with that. Yeah. It's not that but at the same time I was and I don't mean this is about you, but I just 2 cents. I followed Richard Rorty back in the day. Yeah. He was a very big mentor of mine, and he was in VC. He was at UVA, and he either helped me or he ruined my life. He did one of the two. I don't know, but
now this is a very Rorty-esque thing. Since you're mentioning him, I'll say he was actually a friend of mine because we were colleagues at UVA.
Right.
And we were in a book club together, which was like blew my mind because it's like this is Richard Rorty.
It's Richard Rorty.
And I'm just this kid from Tennessee, and here, and his whole attitude toward liberalism being in contact with the world, right? I think is exactly right. And the whole time at UVA, I wanted to be more public than it was, right?
Right.
And when I came to UR, I wanted to be more public than we were, right? We have a responsibility. I said in my inaugural address in the Leibniz Center, I said almost all that we have, we owe to Richmonders.
Right.
In a way. The Jepson, the Weinsteins, the Robbinses.
Right.
All of that.
Right.
And all three of those young men were sons of fathers who died or were not, and the university gave them the chance. So I think I always wanted the university to be as tied to the city as possible because of a sense of obligation and possibility. And it's, I hear there's another university downtown that wants to claim the city as their own, and for good reason, but it's
I'm torn. I'm really torn because I was a Ram and not a Spider.
Yeah.
Not for any real reason. That's a whole nother story.
And it's all great. Our son is an alum of VCU, and I'm actually good friends with Mike Rao. It was kind of funny. I was the senior president when he came in, and so I've been around for a year or two, and so it's interesting to see that he's still in the job. And I decided that 8 years was I was ready to get back to actually what I actually trained to do.
Right.
And so the complexities of being in the city are not to be taken for granted. But anyway, all those things, and look at the architecture of UR. You would not know that we are in Richmond, right? So when they create this place in the early 20th century, it looks like Oxford and Cambridge, right? Which is good because it doesn't have all this Confederate stuff. It doesn't sort of scream early 20th century segregated Richmond. Instead, it claims a longer history. Right. It says we're something that's centuries old. Yes. So when I was president, we were building all these buildings. I said we've cornered the market on gargoyles. Because we're still, and it was a little frustrating to build a new building to raise the money for it and oversee it and everything, and it looked like it was 800 years old, just like everything else. But ironically, stepping outside of history like that, in some ways,
but tying yourself back to it as
well. Exactly, to a great tradition.
Yes.
And so
the Western tradition.
Yeah, exactly. So I came to love the Gothic architecture better than I do. Let's build a red brick box and put white columns in front of it and call it Jeffersonian.
Right.
In some ways, this is more authentic to our purpose.
I agree. I totally agree.
So what, just in case anybody lost the thread of all this, these are all riffs on the way that universities are living with, we can call them paradoxes, you can call them mixed messages, you can call them intrinsic challenges that are never going to go away. But what it means is that that's the job of all of us who take care of a place, is this is going to be around a lot longer than the current political conflict,
Sure.
right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
and why? What do we believe in? We believe that, as you're talking about, that there is a kind of honor in thinking about something that's not of the immediate moment. You never can tell when it's going to be of use, right? I don't think that people knew when they were studying the Civil War that it was going to become, in Charlottesville in 2017, a flashpoint for the whole nation, right? Then you have to be ready. I stood there on the street where Heather Heyer was killed, talking to PBS with a little thing in my ear, kind of, and there's nobody there, just a camera, and trying to explain, why there were people with Confederate flags in Charlottesville mingling with all this. And so it turns out that actually thinking about something that seems irrelevant to modern life, you never can tell when it's going to pop up and be of importance.
No, that's right.
So the point being is that university's neutrality, or of university's centrality, is part of the package. It's part of what we have. And people who want to pretend that we don't live where and when we do are wasting our opportunity. But people who think that only what matters this very moment matters are also missing the point.
Yes, sir. That's good. Thank you. That's wisdom. I like it. Yeah, we really covered a lot of things. We're moving along. All right. Yes, sir.
You can pick up any of those threads you want to. We can just start a new web.
Yes, sir. Going forward, though, with this tension, is there anything the academics, the university system, can do to, I don't want to say insulate themselves, because there are but I guess prepare students, prepare young people for the tensions that they need to carry on, because it doesn't go away outside the university system. Right. Sometimes you may find your own clique and you'll stay in it, I guess. But for lots of us,
all these kids today are going to have 5 different jobs, right?
Right.
And a lot of the jobs they're trained for are going to disappear.
Right.
I think you put your finger on the key point. What is the point of this undergraduate education they were doing, or of all education, is to prepare people for something we don't know is coming.
Right.
Right. And here is another paradox. How do you do that? Well, you could try to teach the thing for which there is an opening in the job market right now. And so I've been doing this for 40 years now, so I've watched, no, what we need is this. No, what we need is that, right? And boy, that's going to be the job of the future and so forth. It's always wrong, right?
Right.
And if you prepare for something that is in need today, by the time you finish, it may not be. So it's another paradox. Ironically, choosing things that are of not immediate importance, but that give you the tool set to adapt to what you don't know is coming, is the best strategy. So it's very hard. We know that the humanities have declining enrollments. Again, the University of Richmond's good about not doing that as much. But, we know the 5 different schools here. And one of the things I loved about being president is I believed in all 5 schools. They all have law school. That's a great mission. Robbins School, SPCS, the College of Arts. It's all important.
Right.
But it's important for, I think about, people who study art, right? You may think that's a sort of a enduring skill, but think how that has changed just in the last 10 years. You develop a fine skill of drawing or drafting or sculpting, and suddenly the world shifts around you.
Okay? Being attacked by AI on top of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are you supposed to do? Well, I think you build the strongest base you can, acknowledging that tension is always going to be there, that you're never going to find, people would think, if I just get a degree in this, I'm set. Right. And, it's a little, I used to meet, all the parents and the freshmen coming in, and you'd see dads usually want their kid to study something that they could get a job in, right?
Yes.
Which is understandable, and I'm not opposed to people having jobs, but it's just kind of weird to think about that. In some ways, the more you try to do that, the less you enable yourself to do it.
Right.
So your question was, what can we do to teach kids to live with this tension? I think that, I remember when I first came here in 2007, and I took a tour of the campus and was talking to the students. And I said, what kind of students are here? And one young woman said, we're practical idealists. And that turned out to be true.
Yeah.
This is not a place where everybody wants to be a poet, right?
No.
Right. But it is a place where we see the kids just can't wait to do some nonprofit work. Or my other joke was everybody wants to run a nonprofit.
Right.
They want to be a nonprofit, but they want to be in charge.
Right.
And so they're ambitious,
Yes.
but they're also idealistic. Kids are so much better than I certainly was in the early 1970s in college.
Right.
I'm completely self-absorbed, right? And the idea of serving the community or whatever just wasn't on the grid. So I think that all the different tool sets that we offer here is exactly what kids need, right? Which is, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with this, which is the phrase people always ask about history. What would I do with that? Well, I ended up running a company or not, but if you study something you don't really want to study, you're not really going to do well at it anyway.
No, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's the host.
Well, yeah, I guess I am. And that's funny because that is what I find about what's so special about liberal arts education.
Yeah.
I don't mean to call out my brethren on the other side of the fence. That's what I call facilities. It's kind of the other side of the fence, even though we are the backbone of this place.
No doubt about it.
No doubt about it. But they don't quite understand. But it is. I feel that liberal arts, or maybe they just haven't been given a chance to understand. Well, it doesn't really matter right now. But I feel that liberal arts education is that foundation to deal with changing times. Because I was thinking about it as I asked you, and I was listening to you, and I was thinking about the two people that changed my life. One was Richard Rorty, and the other one was Plato. And I still go back to Socrates. I'm sorry, I did Socrates. It's not Plato. Okay. It is Socrates.
All right.
I'm sorry, Plato. Let me get back. It was Socrates. It always is Socrates that I come back to. Anyway, and that's what I use.
Yeah, but here's the paradox.
Yes, sir.
Do I want everybody to be a history major? I do not. Concrete skills of knowing actually how to do things are its own kind of liberal education, right? And so,
good point.
I still find, so I grew up where the idea of being a college professor was just like, it wasn't insane, it just wasn't on anybody's radar screen of why you would do that, right?
Me too.
And so I think every day that I've been in the academy, I go, okay, how do I justify this? I remember when I first got the job at UVA, my folks drove up from East Tennessee. My dad was a used car salesman, my mom was a 5th grade teacher. And I shouldn't tell the story, but it's too late, I'm into it now. And so we were moving into this little rental house there. My wife was pregnant, my first kid, and I couldn't believe I got a job because there were no jobs in history in the United States in 1979, 1980. And so I can't really say I was complaining, but I did say, yeah, we need to get moved in because I've got to teach 9 hours this semester. And my mom said, honey, that is a long day. And I said, no, that's a week, Mom. And my dad said, hell, that's not a job, that's a position.
Yeah.
And
right.
I completely understand that.
Right.
It turned out I was working 60 hours a week to do that.
Yeah,
it was hard, but it's working is, So I've devoted my life to the academy, but it's not as important as it is. There is something about it that's not the real world.
Right.
And you have to admit that to yourself, acknowledge it, and try to, okay, if it's not really the real world with all the same pressures, so I've had lifetime job security since I was 33 years old when I got tenure at UVA. So it's like, that's not normal. And so I think a lot of people hate professors and universities because of what they see as arrogance. And I get that. Yeah. And so the point being is that everybody should develop a skill. I found that whenever I try to do something like plumbing, I know how to do it after I've screwed it up in every way possible the first time, and 3 trips to Lowe's, okay? But then I never have to do it again. So basically I just bumble from one job to another. So in an ideal world, I think in many ways, and this is not to suck up to you, but we would do what you're doing, which is to be able to actually have a practical skill and a curiosity about things that are not that skilled.
Right? Man, yeah, thank you, sir. I have a long, complicated history being a poor boy from Richmond, and I pretty much dropped out of the academy, and really didn't come back until I started working here, and then realizing, that I do like parts. I do like the academy. I mean,
and
I do like
SPCS being such a welcoming place.
Yes, and they very much so are, and it's just having to read books, certain books again, and I'm actually well read because it's how I could stay quiet and avoid beatings. I could read in a place and no one would see me, and then not hear, and while everyone else was getting beatings, I was hiding reading, and I like it. So, so I mean, I've always had that, but I've also come from just blue collar people that took things apart with their hands and put it back together with their hands, and all that. So it was almost an easy fallback, as opposed to really taking the step would have been to really go and step out into the academic world.
Yeah.
But I just didn't know what it looked like, And
it's a weird thing.
It's a weird thing.
If you don't have somebody to explain to you what teaching 9 hours a week means, so I find that generally, to be honest, people who do something practical, even that requires a bunch of education, like a doctor or a scientist, are more open to the other side, if we think of it that way, of the humanities and the arts. Right. Than the people who are in the humanities and the arts open to something practical. Right?
I've seen that.
And so when I'm out giving public talks and stuff, people have asked me a great question, they come up and they're doing something that's completely removed. Whereas I think that, well, you get it. And so I think that it's my own tribe's need, which is to actually look for something practical to do, and a way to be of use in the world. And so, and it returns to our theme of tension for all of this. Right. I mean, I think, a lot of self-help stuff is trying to get rid of tension. Yeah. But it's not, tension is life.
Agreed.
Right? And that's where Richard Rorty is.
Right. And I was even studying, I did a paper on Bernays recently, and the psychoanalysis, he was using Freud and psychoanalysis, and they still use it, unfortunately, but they were trying to get away from tension as well. But it didn't really work. It actually went into mind control as opposed to,
that's right.
Like the Pax Romana, the old saying. The Pax Romana was the peace, because there was no one left to, go against it.
Right.
Psychoanalysis was kind of along those similar lines, especially in those early.
Well, yeah, I mean, Freud acknowledged, hey, we're always going to live with tension, right? It's people who follow him and try to get rid of the tension.
Right.
And not to get too deep, but it's also at the heart of most religions, that there is a tension. You might as well acknowledge it between sin and virtue or whatever, and only by acknowledging it can you hope to, if not transcend it, at least master it, right? So I think, go back to the very first point about what are universities for. In many ways, we're about acknowledging tension and thinking it through so that it doesn't own us, right? History, basically, if you don't have some idea of what it is, it's pushing you around, right? You don't know. I remember teaching freshmen here, and in the first year seminars, and ask sort of like, so how's history touch your life? And, they had some good answers. I said, how about your hair? How about your shoes? How about the video game? And they came to realize that there's nothing about us that's not our history, right? And which is both alarming. It's time to get over ourselves, right? That nobody lives outside of history. But I said, just look at your sophomore high school picture and look at yourself now. You can see the history that's happened in between, right? So I think, one good thing about a university, if it's doing its job, it helps everybody get over themselves, right? Hey, look, we've been thinking about this stuff for a long time before you came along. And I do find that, in my last graduation ceremony here in 2015, I had everybody, all the students bring cameras or bring their iPhones and take pictures of each other. And then our friends in facilities found ways for all those to be projected around the Robbins Center.
Wow.
And the whole idea, and so everybody thought that was great because it's all, and I said, you're going to look back on this and think, we were carrying around $500 computers in our pockets so that we could take pictures, right? Because the iPhone was invented the year I became president here, 2007.
Right.
And then by the time I leave, then everybody has one.
Well, no, yeah, and by the 2015 or so, it had more computing power, even at 15, and we're at 25 now.
Oh, yeah.
So even I think back in 15 or 16, it had more computing power than like what they, putting on the early Apollo missions and things like that.
Exactly.
Like it was, it is a supercomputer.
Yeah, exactly. And so people feeling smug about it, but I said, this is going to seem ridiculous to you in a short period of time. So it was my usual thing of trying to be amusing, but then the lesson is, let's get over ourselves, right? Because it feels like you're growing up at we're the result of all that's happened behind us, and we're kind of in, boy. And I think kids today don't have the luxury of having that illusion after they've seen so many things that happen in their own lives that are...
Yeah, it's funny. That's another tension, if you will. Not to, oddly enough, where like, I don't raise my kids the way I was raised, or I would be handcuffed and, my wife would kill me first.
Right.
So I wouldn't even be going to
I know what you
jail.
mean.
She would just kill me. But so I don't raise my kids the way I was raised, and I'm proud about that, actually. But at the same time, I was still raised to live in the world and survive in the world, and sometimes my kids are smart, thankfully. They got to their mom. They're smart and all, but I wonder if they're gonna. I guess that's just the human, the parent, like in you, anyways. Like if they're gonna actually be able to survive the hardships of the world. Where like I was not worried about the world in a way. I was just worried about. Anyway, because I'd already been beaten around and kicked around, where I wasn't worried about the world. I was more worried about really succeeding than anything.
I was so worried about Dad coming home.
Yeah, right.
It would be so, being at least 20 years older than you,
yes,
I've seen this even more than you're talking about.
Indeed.
And
yes, you have.
And then to live through, I say that not to...
No, you're the same age as my uncle. Uncle Dick is younger than my father, but you're the same age as my uncle. And I was thinking about it this morning when I was driving in. He cried. My father never forgave him. My father was a Marine. Never forgave him for crying when the Beatles broke up in '70. And he told that poor story about my uncle forever. And but you guys are the same age, and he ended up crying in '70 when they broke up.
Well, part of this is that I had this kind of unfashionably long hair, partly as a result of growing up. It's sort of like, I know I'm going to have to wear suits and stuff now. How does this happen? I end up being sort of a CEO. I don't know. My joke is, my wife married a hippie history professor and ended up married to the freaking president. And so you see how this goes. But I think a large part of my dad's job, who was in Korea when he was 19, right? He was mean to me to toughen me up, which I'm not really...
That's what they called it.
I don't know if that works or not, but anyway, it's... And I do... People who have taught kids through COVID have said, they have that worry. You know, just being at home for 2 years outside the classroom.
Right.
You know, but I will say this, that people have always thought that kids are going to hell.
That's true.
I mean, really, I mean, and kids have always thought their parents are idiots. So it's part, I think it's innate in the species, and probably it's good for us, right, to do all this. But yeah, talk about perpetual tension. Let's be a parent.
Yes. No, that's yes, sir. Yes, that is great. Because that's the. I'd like to. I guess I've just been a little bit on edge with the first 100 days of the 2.0 presidency, just because of the onslaught of things, just things. I'll just the onslaught of nouns of just things and just the chaos of it all. And I will say, and that's why it's really good that this talk is happening, because I myself, and I think other people that listen to you and will listen to you, it's a very calming effect that, don't get me wrong, it's still a little bit of a chaotic time, and it's a little bit of a crazy time.
It is unprecedented.
But it is not the end of the world.
Well, one thing about studying slavery
right.
and the Civil War and segregation is that, many Americans, millions of Americans have had it worse than we are right now. And so I don't want to make think, that I'm all calm and just let all this current events wash over me. And because I feel the same anxiety and anger and frustration of other people. But what I notice is that history moves more often by counterpoint than anything else. So in many ways, what we're seeing now is a backlash to Barack Obama.
I know it.
Okay?
I know it.
Well,
I told my wife that 8 years ago.
Yeah. And what does it mean, though? There's going to be a counterpoint to Donald Trump, right? And, the thing that hits me so directly is the attack on the National Endowment for the Humanities, right? Public libraries. So the places basically where I sort of spend my life. Right. I was thinking today, I do believe that when this is over, they will come back. In some ways, maybe it's like pruning, that after they come back stronger than they were before. Because good people I know have worked for years to get a grant ready for NEH, and it was supposed to start this fall, and for it just to be taken away.
Exactly.
That's where I do take consolation from thinking about the worst things in American history for a living. What was the counterpoint to enslavement? Was Reconstruction. I grew up in the segregated South. I mean, I grew up, where first words I learned were white and colored and so forth, right? So what I always tell my students, there's only one lesson I've been able to learn from history. Worse things than you can imagine can happen, but better things than you can imagine can happen, right? So the most of our job, this is what the job of the university is, I think, is to make sure that when we're living through some of the worse than we can imagine, that we're planting the seeds for things that are better than we can imagine.
Right.
I just noticed driving in, it looks like they cut back the tulips, right, which were really pretty at the sign, in order to make room for the next flowers, right?
That's right.
And so that is what I think, is that the long cycles of history don't remove the pain of the short cycles, but they give us hope that the short cycle will remain just that.
Yes, sir. Right.
I feel like a conclusion.
Amen.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.